Hi, it's Mike Sylvester again from Core Essentials with another video. Last time, I promised that I would go over why muscles get tight in the first place, specifically the hamstrings. So we'll go over that in detail today. I'll also talk about how activating the core can release the parking brake, so to speak, which allows immediate increases in range of motion. I'll be talking about why someone can't touch their toes standing, but when they assume a long sitting position, they can. Why? Lastly, I'll expand on my thoughts on PNF, which we briefly talked about last time. Looking forward to it. Let's get started. As promised, I'm going to talk about, during this portion of the lecture, what causes the hamstrings to get tight in the first place, like I promised I would on the previous lecture I did. So we're going to go over a lot of different things today. So I'm going to try to, as I always say, I'm going to try to scale it down as much as I can, but at the same time, I don't want to butcher physiology, okay? So I'm going to try to somewhat meet you in the middle, okay? So today we're going to talk a lot about muscle and anatomical possibilities. So the first one is anatomical possibilities that contribute to tight hamstrings. We're going to talk about lower cross syndrome, or this anterior tilted pelvis. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in detail in a second. But we'll just go over all three. Muscle imbalances, weak glutes or buttocks muscles, weak abdominals, and tight hip flexors and tight erector spinae or lower back. Those can contribute to possible anterior tilting position or that lower cross syndrome, okay? And hyperpronation, which is basically when your feet are in like this knock knee. Okay, we'll get into that, okay? And how that can actually affect the pelvis and going into an anterior tilt. I was fascinated when I learned about that. I thought that was very interesting, how the feet can affect everything up the chain, which makes sense. So let's define lower cross syndrome. Get that all the way, that should stop. I'm not used to these high-tech things, but it's kind of fun. All right, lower cross syndrome. My drawing is not the best, but I did the best I could. I do all these drawings, by the way. It's good or bad as they are. So this is a particular male, it's a male here. In the line, if you can see that, we got the tight muscles that cross over. There was a man back in the, I think it was the early 1900s, don't quote me on this. His name was Vladimir Janda. That's J-A-N-D-A. He did a lot of stuff. Talk about upper cross syndrome, lower cross syndrome. We're talking about lower cross syndrome right now. And it's characterized by tight muscles and weak muscles. The tight muscles are on this part of the X. The erector spinae muscles here, the lower back, tight. Iliopsoas muscles, the muscles that are on the ilium here, as well as attach the psoas major, which attaches to the first 5 vertebrae and attach onto what they call the lesser trochanter of the femur, okay? If those are tight, it can actually cause a lot of that anterior tilting, coupled with weak abdominals and weak glutes, muscles of the butt, okay? So you got weak abdominals, weak glutes, tight hip flexors. We kind of go into this anterior tilted position. I'm going to get into that very shortly. So that is one possibility that could cause the hamstrings to be put a lot of tension on them when you're positioned like this. So we need to first address the anatomical issues. If there are there, an assessment would determine that, okay? A lot of times people, when they do exercises, they'll do leg lowering. I see a big arch in the back. The abdominals are not strong enough to support it, and they can actually promote more and more of that anterior tilted pelvis, okay? So that's lower cross syndrome in a nutshell. We also had up there the third thing, we're gonna skip the second one right now. The third one, hyperpronation, we're gonna go to right now, okay? So if you've ever seen people, I'm often on Newbury Street in Boston, and I people watch. Back when I was in my 20s, I people watched for a different reason, but now I'm looking at people's feet, And I'm seeing like this is called like this is pes planus if we're just looking at it statically. But if we're walking and we're seeing this, that's called pronation. It's a combination of dorsiflexion, which is putting the foot like this, and then eversion, and then a little bit of abduction of the foot. It collapses the foot. Because if you don't have good range in your calf, you're going to borrow it from other joints in the foot and ankle. So if you get poor flexibility of the ankle, this can cause this. Many other causes, but the biggest reason is tight calves, okay? You're kind of like taking the path of least resistance, and then you end up looking like this. This is the normal foot, okay? See that straight line up there, normal biomechanics. So why does that cause that anterior tilt, you may ask, right? This is also called knock knees or valgus. It's like this, okay? So let's see if I can get this right. Oh, nice. I'll just keep it there for now. So we got the knock knees. We get the foot actually rolled in, the knee. The tibia is internally rotated, just simply internally rotated. That follows suit up the kinetic chain. The femur or the thigh bone will internally rotate, and it'll cause the femoral head to migrate posteriorly. This is how it looks normally. But when you have this hyperpronation going on, over time, this can actually cause the femoral head to migrate or translate posteriorly, and causing this anterior shifting or anterior tilt of the pelvis, which again will cause those hamstrings to get tight. So the feet can cause tight hamstrings. The pelvis, anterior tilt, can cause tight hamstrings. That's what we're talking about today. But also, we want to come back. Let's see if I can do this. I did this earlier, and I was getting the things all screwed up in terms of the buttons. So I think I got it down. It just tells you that you should be practicing more, right, Mike? So anyway, we talked about anatomical possibilities briefly. We talked about the lower cross syndrome. We're going to get into that in a second. And the muscle imbalances we haven't talked about really that much. So let's talk about a little bit more about the lower cross syndrome or anterior tilt and weak versus tight muscles, which affect the hip position, anterior or posterior. Anterior is arching, posterior is rounding, okay? And there's basically, these are the two pictures I'm going to go over today on this part of the lecture. So if we sit a lot, it basically causes the muscles to get tight in the front of the hips. So the hip flexors get tight. So if they're always active, when they're always tight, it can actually cause the muscles of the buttocks to shut down. We call that reciprocal inhibition. And we get what we call gluteal amnesia, which is basically the buttocks muscles shut off. They don't do the job, so they don't position the pelvis the way we want it to be positioned. So here is an anterior tilted pelvis, okay? So if you can see this, it's hard to see the blue line here. It's going down in the front, and this is going up this way. So it's, if the muscles of the hip muscles are tight, it's actually going to cause the pelvis to go this. Coupled with a tight lower back, it's going to tilt the pelvis this way, like that, sway back, okay? What do you think that's going to do to the hamstring? It's going to really cause a lot of tension on there. So rather than stretch it, we want to actually see if we can influence in any way the pelvis by actually neutralizing it. The posterior pelvic tilt is just the opposite. The muscles of the rectus abdominis and the gluteus in the hamstrings will actually cause that pelvis to rotate this way. And what do you think happens when the when this is pulling this way and this is pulling this way, it causes rotation. That's called a force couple, by the way. When one force is going in one direction and another force is going in the opposite direction, that's called the force couple, and it causes rotation. So when that goes into that posterior rotation position, it'll actually loosen up those hamstrings. It takes the tension off of them. And you'll see that when I talk about on the next portion of this lecture, when we do like a leg raise, we want to actually position the pelvis in the right position, otherwise, and contract the muscles of the abdominals. It's amazing what we see in terms of how immediate the hamstring length improves. But that's later on in the lecture, okay? So strengthening the glutes, strengthening the rectus abdominis will actually help neutralize the pelvis. So just think of it this way, it's tug of war. We got tight hip flexors, tight lower back, and we got weak hamstrings, weak glutes, weak abdominals. That's gonna win this position. So if we strengthen the glutes, strengthen the abdominals, we're gonna see this more of a I don't have a picture of it, but we'll be more of a neutral position of the pelvis. And that's gonna take the tension off the hamstrings. That's what we're here to talk about today. Why do the hamstrings get tight? This is one of the reasons that we talked about it. Let's review. We talked about being in this position is going to make them feel tight, and overpronating in the feet is another one. So let's talk about that now. We get that down. Let's talk more about the hyperpronation. Let's bring this one up, and we'll bring this one down. Does it happen all together? Oh, I love it. Okay. So, hopefully you absorbed everything. It's a lot of information to absorb. So, what can we do for a person that has hyperpronated feet? They're walking, first of all, during the gait cycle, normal gait cycle, we usually, some people in Kenya will toe running, they land on the balls of the feet curve. But generally speaking, heel, outside of the heel, we call that supination. Then we hit the foot, we flatten it, we call that pronation. By the way, pronation is a normal function of gait. We need to have pronation because it actually has a chance, the foot has a chance to feel the earth. Okay, we want to feel that, and it promotes shock absorption. We need to pronate, but we don't need to pronate too long. So when we go into mid stance, we should resupinate the foot. We should take the arch off the ground, and then we have a nice rigid lever to actually toe off. So a lot of people online, a lot of physical therapists, a lot of trainers will say, let's go just a barefoot running, barefoot walking, just walk barefoot. I agree with it. But in the beginning, just having somebody go from motion controlled sneakers, let's say, to or maybe even an orthotic in there, and then just put them on the ground, it could be causing some other issues. So what I like to tell my patients or clients is keep the footwear that you have, or possibly get an orthotic to correct this, put a Band-Aid on anyway. And then in the meantime, while you're doing that, do some strengthening exercises, particularly for the posterior tibialis muscle, which is basically, it inverts the foot and it plantar flexors the foot. When I was at UMass, we just learned the normal functions of the foot. We didn't learn the functional actions of the foot. The posterior tibialis not only inverts and plantar flexors the foot. Plantar flexors is this. That's plantar flexion, heel raise. And inversion is this. Okay? But the real function of the posterior tibialis is to actually decelerate pronation. If it's not doing that, it's just going to flop down. So we want to strengthen the muscles in the foot. One of them being, like I said, the posterior tib. So we have exercises that we can do while we're in the shoes that are actually going to give us some support. Down the road, we actually throw the shoes away and get more working barefoot or minimalist shoes. That's my take on that. So the next video I'm going to talk about is these exercises put into practice. So one last thing I want to talk about before we go into the exercises is I forgot to actually talk about it during the first part of this lecture. If your glutes are not firing the way they should, like we talked about gluteal amnesia, then the hamstrings kind of take over to do a lot of what the glute is supposed to do. The glute extends the hip, and the hamstrings actually extend the hip too, but their prime function is to flex the knee. You see in gyms where people lie down prone and then flex the knee. That's one function, but the hamstring also assists in hip extension, is this, hip extension. So if the glutes are not doing their job, the hamstrings will overcompensate. We call that synergistic dominance. So if the glutes are not firing the way they should, the hamstrings overwork and they can get tight. So I didn't talk about that earlier, but I just want to make sure that people know that the glutes are not working right. Hamstrings will kind of be the second stringer, and they'll work overtime and they'll get tight over time. We finally reached the exercise portion of this video. Me and my friend, I'm going to introduce in a second. We're at 4 Kicks in Marlborough. They have one in Norfolk and Taunton. Great, great facility. But demonstrating the exercises today is the one and only Gary Lubin. Gary, when did we meet? 1984?
Yes.
At a health club in Natick?
Natick, that's
which
right,
is
yeah.
no longer there.
Right, correct.
But Gary I've been training him off and on since 1984. He's a great, great person to train. It's fun, and he really knows his body pretty well, which is a plus. Now I know there's a lot of other people that are beginners that may not know what Gary knows. We'll try to scale it down for those people too as well as we go through the exercises. But first I just want to review this concept of this lower cross syndrome that I went over. So I'm going to call it an anterior tilted pelvis. It's kind of like this versus this way. So again, just to review, a man back in maybe 1940s, Vladimir Janda, he started this whole thing. He had upper cross syndrome, lower cross syndrome, and many other things he discovered. But he found out that on one line, we have weak glutes and weak abdominals on this line. And I'm going to explain in a second. And then tight hip flexors or iliopsoas and tight lower back, rectus spinae. So if you can see these arrows, I'm sorry, you see these arrows, they're pointing down, and this one's pointing up. So it's going like this. So when it goes like that, the hamstring and the glutes go into more of a stretch weakness. That's why I have that. If a muscle is stretched too far, it's going to get weak. So I'm a proponent of not stretching a person's hamstrings if they're like anterior tilted. I know there's some people on the internet that disagree, but I think it makes sense to me. If this is already stretched, you're feeling the tension, we want to calm them down. So we strengthen the glutes, strengthen the hamstrings, and strengthen the abdominals. That's what we're going to go over today. It's mostly glutes and abdominals. I'm going to hold off on hip flexors, the iliopsoas. There's a lot of controversy on the hip flexors, whether to strengthen them, stretch them, and a lot of the stuff that's out there is really not getting to the real root of the issue. And to a person that's online named Connor Harris, I'm going to refer the viewers to him. Up here you'll see the card that comes across the screen. Excellent video on the hip flexors. You won't be disappointed. I just don't want to reinvent the wheel. He did a great job on it. Kudos to Connor Harris. All right, so that's the review of the lower cross syndrome. So we're going to start the exercises now, Gary. Okay, so we're going to have you lie on your back. We have a little towel here just to, if you notice, if it heads down, it almost goes into like a little bit of a hyperextended position. We're just going to give him a little bit of cushion, so he's nice and in good alignment. So the first thing we want to do is we want to see if again, we're going over the glutes right now. And I'll tell you when we transition to the abdominals, okay? And then we're gonna go over the feet, which I didn't really talk about in the introduction. I wanna strengthen the feet, I wanna strengthen the abs, and I wanna strengthen the glutes, because that all has a lot to do with realigning the pelvis so the hamstrings can take off that tension. Okay, so now that we know where we're going, sorry about the coughing in the earlier portion of the video. So I want to see if my client can actually contract their glutes. It's called kinesthetic sense of awareness. So I'm going to just put my fingers, I always ask the patient, Gary, is it okay if I touch your glutes? Okay. And if they don't feel it, I put their hands in. Okay, if they don't give me consent. So I have my hands right on the glutes and I ask Gary, can you contract your glutes? Push your butt into my fingers and relax. Again, push and relax. He's got a great contraction there. It's not any different than if I asked him to flex his bicep. Can you see that? Tighten. He's not moving his elbow. That's demonstrating a good kinesthetic sense of awareness. Good mind-body connection. So again, we're just tightening and relaxing. And that might be the first step. Some people may not be able to do that, and we need to work on that. So that's first thing. We're going over more kinesthetic sense of awareness, knowing how to contract the muscle at will without a dumbbell or a barbell. All right, the second thing we want to go over is what we call the posterior and anterior pelvic tilt. This position requires Gary to actually bend his knees. So now, if you can zoom in on this, so going into an arch or an anterior pelvic tilt, which we don't want to do during all of these exercises. So we got to first teach the patient or client how to actually maneuver their hips. There's a lot of movement potential in it. We're moving only in the sagittal plane right now, up and down, okay, forward and back. So he's pushing his back into the mat or the table. I can feel it pressed. Now arch your back, Gary. So now there's a space here. I don't know if you can pick that up, but there's a space here. So going into the posterior tilt, anterior tilt. Somewhere in the middle is neutral, is where I want to keep them. That's great. Neutral position, abs are tight. They're braced as if someone's going to punch in the stomach. They're not pushed up, they're braced. So we want to try to minimize how much the abdominal rises when we're doing the exercises. Okay, so the first glute exercise is the two-legged bridge. All right, so we're gonna, sometimes people will, if they have good knee flexion, you can put your hands here and just line up your feet with that, yeah, and that's, Gary's got good mobility, but some people you may have to move them away, but this is the ideal position. I'm gonna have his hands up like this, just opens up his chest. And I'm gonna remove this because when he lifts his hips up, I don't want him to hyperflex his neck, okay? So your abs are tight, you're in neutral. You wanna maintain that pelvic position throughout the whole exercise. So you're gonna lift the hips up high as you can without losing that tilt, high as you can, holding it for a set amount of time. We also wanna look to make sure his hips are not dropped on one side or the other. It looks good. Sometimes they'll put a little dowel here, but most of the time it rolls into the person's neck. So, how does that feel, Gary? Feels good. If he gets a cramp, I tell them to lift the toes. And the cramp just simply means that the hamstring, the cramp in the hamstring, I should say. If he gets a cramp in the hamstring, I tell him to lift his toes. That tells me his hamstrings are doing most of the work. He's hamstring dominant. More of a reason why he needs to strengthen the glutes, so he basically can shut them down. So that's the glute bridge. I would have somebody do, 1, 2, or even 3 sets of 15 of those in that perfect position, like he's doing. Hold for a few seconds at the top. Got his toes up, great. His belly is not bulging, it looks great. And he comes down. So that's the first glute exercise. The second glute exercise is a progression of this. We would have him bring up one knee. Actually, let's bring this one up so they can see that. Which is better, this or does it matter? Okay. So we get that up there. What this is doing is it's actually going into more of a posterior tilt if his knee is like that. If he was like this, it would kind of, the back would want to arch. We don't want to do that. We want to keep it up here like this. And now we do the same thing. And this is where most people get a cramp. And that's when I tell somebody, you got a hamstring issue. Lift up, or a glute issue. Hold it a few seconds and come down. And now this one I'm watching his hips too. I want to make sure that either hip doesn't drop. Okay? It's usually this side because this side's holding it up. This is working a lot of muscles here. It's working a lot of the muscles in the spine, the local muscles we talked about very early on, the tonic muscles. How's that feel, Gary?
A bit of a workout.
Okay. So, and then we'd obviously do it with the other leg. I won't do that now, but that's the second glute exercise. The third glute exercise, and we're going to come back here to do abs, but I want to, can you get up and we'll do the, I'll be right back. I'm just going to get the ball. So you could do it right in front of the camera here. I know I'm going in front of the camera the whole time here. So let me get behind, let me go over here, sorry. So we'll start with the left leg. The front leg is the working leg. It's a stance position. It's very important during gait. And I think this is more functional than anything we did on the floor. But I do like the glute bridges very, very well because the feet are on the floor and you're lifting up. So now you get your arms straight and you're just gonna just come down. I sometimes have, you're not gonna do the squat though, Gary.
Okay.
We're gonna just do like a Romanian deadlift kind of thing, yeah. Coming down, just gonna tilt this a little bit, yep. His back is straight. He's almost touching his shins with the ball. Coming up, coming all the way up. How's that feel, Gary?
Definitely got to hold your balance here.
Do you feel the butt?
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And again, we could make this harder or easier. Let's start with the easier. If he doesn't have much control of his spine, we're just going to go down maybe a few inches. That's it, and come up. Notice that his knee is locked at 5 degrees. He's not. Some people will let's do it wrong. Let's bend the knee and down. And that's not wrong, but it's just doing more of a squat pattern versus a deadlift pattern. And we want to really get the glutes versus the quads, okay? Mm-hmm. So coming down, and that would be the first step, is just get the pattern down. He's got very little weight on his back leg. I call that like more of a kickstand position. And he's got his foot, he's making sure his foot doesn't pronate forward. He's got his knee kind of outward a little bit. His knee is straight, but you want to make sure his arch is lifted off the ground, yeah. Coming down, arms are straight. So he's got 80% of his weight on his heel of his front foot, yeah, and 20% of his weight on his back foot. He's doing a great job. How will we make this harder? We go down as low as we can. We're just using this, we want the chest to be high, so if you get a beam of light, we're going straight ahead. We don't want it to be rounding the spine. He's got a good spine angle here. Perfect position. Now how will we make that even harder? Where we go to heavier resistance, medicine balls, kettlebells, dumbbell, whatever you got, okay? So that's the dip and bird. I call it the dip and bird. I learned that a long time ago when I was a partner with another person in the business, and she had a total partial knee operation, and they had a physical therapist that was there, introduced me to that exercise, the dip and bird, and she loved it. Because it's actually bypassing, if somebody's more quad dominant, it bypasses the quad. You're getting more glutes, as Gary said. All right, so now we're off to the abs. Let's do some ab exercises. Obviously, there's a lot more glute exercises, but we're just basically giving you 3. Lie on your back, Gary, and I'll give you. So, we talked about this, well, we're going to talk about this in more detail, but a lot of times people mistake their posterior chain muscles, keep it straight, as the tightness in something. But sometimes the rectus abdominis, the muscles of the abs, if they're not contracting, it can actually not align the pelvis in a perfect position where it can actually, if it's anterior tilted, as we talked about, the hamstring's fighting against that. So if we actually create tension in the abs, neutralize that pelvis, we see immediate changes in the range of motion in the hamstring. So yes, this is a abdominal exercise, but it's also a pattern, so it actually allows the hamstring to get more range by actually positioning the pelvis in a stable position. Why would the body want mobility if it doesn't feel stable? So stability should always precede mobility. So Gary, you're just going to open your arms up like this. Keep your feet straight toward Canada. We're in Massachusetts. All right. So we keep them straight. I'm going to put my hand on his opposite leg that's supposedly not working, but we want to keep it in extension, which is down. Okay. Tighten on my hand. Keep this leg straight. Keep the quad tight. Lift this leg up as high as you can. Okay. Okay, come back down. All right, so let's do a little test. Now I'm gonna introduce the rectus abdominis and the transverse abdominis, the muscles in the abdominals. I'm gonna have him hold these little handles. This is gonna actually stabilize his pelvis by actually contracting his abs. Now, if you don't have this, you could use regular tubing and tie it to a stable object, but you're gonna bring these down just a little bit like that. Your arms stay straight the whole time. And I'm gonna pull on this. Do you feel the tension?
Oh yeah.
So now I want you to lift that left leg. Keep the right one down. Now, as you can see, hopefully you can see that difference. It's amazing. It's awesome. I do this. This is a great exercise to strengthen the abs in a movement pattern that's important for real life. All right, come back down. We didn't test the other one, but assuming that we did, we want to make sure they're symmetrical, by the way. But anyway, that's one of the abdominal exercises that we do. And like I said, we'll go into more detail about that later on in the video. So now we're going to take this away, and we're going to do the dead bug. I have a little bone of contention with a lot of physical therapists because a dead bug doesn't move, right? I call it the dying bug. So your legs are up. Actually, let's just do it this way first. Bend the knees, yeah, I'm sorry. Start off the easiest way possible for a beginner. You're in that posterior tilt, but not overly tilted, so your abs are contracting. You feel that? And he would actually have his arm go back, and then his other arm. If you have a shoulder issue, just have them go back as far as their pain-free range. So this may look like it's not doing anything, but if he's keeping this muscle contracted, it's working. And he can hold dumbbells in his hands to make that a little harder. So now the next step would be to actually, we do the dozen of those in 2 or 3 sets. And then the second thing is he's still got his abdomen. He doesn't want that to be bulging. Now he lifts his knees up and he keeps his hands there. We're just gonna do the legs now. He brings the leg out, call these like kickouts. What are we watching for? I would put my hand underneath him, or he could put his hand underneath his low back, and they would give him that feedback that he needs. He has a little difficulty with his left shoulder, so I'm going to put it on his right side. So I got my hands underneath, or he has his hand underneath. What is he monitoring? He's monitoring that his back doesn't come off the hand. He doesn't want it to go into an arch or an anterior tilt. That's the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to contract the abs. That would lengthen them. How's that feel, Gary?
It's working the ears.
If his neck is okay, I could lift his head up and he'd get more of a contraction as long as this doesn't.
That feels good.
Does that feel it?
Yeah.
And then if he wants to go full-blown dying bug, you bring his arms up, bring this arm down and this leg down. Yep, like that. And then bring it up, and then the other side. Yeah, just keep that right there. Yeah. Yes. His head up. If he gets too tight in his neck, I would put it down, or take his tongue and put it to the roof of his mouth. Sometimes that can shut off the muscles of the neck. His abs are looking perfect. They're not bulging up. How's that feel, Gary?
Working.
Yeah. How we make this harder? Ankle weights, hand weights. So that's the progression on the dead bug, okay? So, there's one other thing that I want to talk about. I'm going over these 2 exercises, but I want to refer the viewer to the McGill Big 3, and that's be a play card coming up on the top. of the screen so you can see a video on those 3 exercises. Those are great exercises for the abs, in addition to what we did today. But that should suffice. All right, so the next thing is we got to strengthen the feet, because as we mentioned, if the feet are, can I get in the front here? I call this poor me. All right, the feet, the inside of the foot is rolled in, the knees follow suit, the hips follow suit, the tibias go into internal rotation, the femur go into internal rotation. The arm like this. This is poor me. When you come up, I call this superior me. Your arches are off, your knees are in a better position, and your back is straighter. So we want to address if someone has hyperpronation, as we discussed in the previous section of the video. So we're going to do some cone touches of varying heights. So Gary, if you get up, we can. How are you doing, Gary?
And very well, thank you.
All right, so let's go over the cone touch. Yeah, why don't you take your shoes off? I'm sorry, take your shoes off. I like having the shoes off for a lot of these exercises because it actually, you can feel the earth and you can sort of get better kinesthetic sense of awareness. And he's taking it full blown, I love it. And I can see his foot. I can see his foot if it's going into too much eversion, dorsiflexion, and abduction. This is eversion, dorsiflexion, and abduction. So we're going to avoid that. It's a triplanar motion, pronation. All right, so we're going to try to see if we can strengthen the muscles in the foot, particularly the posterior tibialis, which does a lot of work during gait. So I'm going to go over here so you can get out of the camera. So you're going to stand on your right leg, and you're on your side. Yep. You're going to stand over there, but come back a little bit. Yeah. And he's on his right leg because when he's reaching over his right side, that automatically picks his arch up off the floor, whereby strengthening that posterior tib muscle. That's its function, is to resupinate during gait, during mid-stance. All right, so just gonna touch, I get the varying height. I start there, and if he has a hard time, I would be kind of holding him here like this, or he'd be next to a stable object. Okay, so see if you can do it without me first. So you're gonna stand on your right leg, and you're gonna reach with your left hand.
I didn't know.
If you want to come a little closer, you can, so you don't reach as much. Yeah. Awesome, awesome. And he's not rounding. He's got a nice position. He's almost like doing a Romanian deadlift. We're gonna bring it over a little bit, just to give him a little. So if you can zoom in on his foot. The down foot, you can see that's an ankle strategy, normal. He's working a lot of those muscles in the feet. So again, he could hold on to me. I was on the wrong side.
That's cool.
So what you don't want to do is you want to try to keep the weight on the heel and the midfoot. You don't want to go on the toes. That looks great. So I do a dozen of those, 3 sets on each side. So if that's a little easy, I'd go to a smaller cone. Let's go over this way.
Like that?
Yeah, come back a little bit. Yeah, just so you can see it better. See from a different angle. You can see that arch coming off. Good. How's that feel, Gary?
Getting used to it.
Thanks for reminding me about the shoes, because I definitely would do this without people having their shoes on. So what are we doing here? We're not just strengthening the foot, we're getting the glute big time. So we're doing it in a pattern. We're strengthening the muscles in the foot, the glute in a pattern, the abs, as he says. So we're getting a lot of work, a lot of cluck for your buck here. So it's integrating everything that we learned here. So now we go to this on the cone. Gary's gonna go home and take a shower and go to bed.
No, I'm good.
So this is the last of them. Nice. So I think people get the idea. Some people might have excessive foot position. They're pushing their toes in. That's what causes hammer toe, because they don't have, one of the reasons, they don't have good strength in the intrinsic muscles of the foot and some of the other muscles like the posterior tib. So if those muscles are not working, the toes try to actually compensate. So that's good. So one more exercise here on this section is the beginner exercise before the cones. You have your feet off the ground, you can hold on here, and you're just doing what they call a bug squish we talked about. So you can do this standing or sitting, but I'm going to have them do it standing. So you just kind of, lifting the arches off the floor, and then like you're trying to kill a bug. Yeah, so that's eversion, and that's inversion. So inversion is more supination. It's coupled with supination, and eversion is more associated with pronation. Okay, so when he comes up, he's not just actually strengthening his foot. He's going into a little external rotation. He's getting a lot of muscles in his hips. You feel it? So to go from that, progression would be if he wants to hold on and take your left foot off, and then just do it with one foot. Yep, and you come down. Try to keep the toes on the floor as much as you can, so the big toe and the heel is actually staying in contact. Yeah, so you're really getting those muscles. How's that feel, Gary?
Good.
Yeah, you feel it, right?
I do.
His knees straight, he's got a nice upright posture. And he would do like a dozen of those for 2 to 3 sets. Or as tolerated on all these exercises. I know I've given some suggestions, but as tolerated, I want a disclaimer there. So he would do that with the other, but I see a little bit of toe compensation there, particularly his second and third toes. I see that a lot.
Yeah.
So some closing comments. I don't mean to belabor this video, but we also, like on a video previous to this, I was talking about how to get more. One of the biggest reasons that people hyperpronate is that calves are tight, but also they have very lack of mobility in the ankle itself. I've tested a lot of people in my day, and they could barely get, I don't know if you can see this. This is 0 degrees of dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion is when the toes come toward the shin. So we need at least 10 degrees for walking. We need 20 degrees for running of dorsiflexion, of pulling this back. And it could be caused by soft tissue restrictions, which stretching and toe touch progression can help. But also if the ankle itself and the bones, if it's really ankle mobility issue, there's some ankle mobility drills that I'm going to show you while I'm talking to you right here. And what Beth is doing is that she's got this band around her ankle, and she's actually moving forward. It's actually giving some distraction and opening up that joint. Because if the joint is really not movable, then I don't care how much stretching exercise you do, you need to mobilize that ankle. And this is a self-mobilizing technique that she's doing that I'm showing you here. So again, this is the last time I'm going to say thanks for watching.